Assalamu alaikum and welcome to IQRA TV. I'm Rabina Amir, your host for the day. Today's topic on Medicour is very much about issues to do with your gut. So that's the things that happen to your food after you've eaten it. In the hot seat today, I'd like to welcome back Dr. Raj. Thank you very much for coming, Dr. Raj.
Thank you for having me.
You're a surgical trainee from the Leeds Teaching Hospital. You're a member of the Royal College of Surgeons. You've got a separate degree in anatomy and you've got a specialist interest in gut issues.
That's right, yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about all sorts of things that can go wrong with our gut and the intestines and the digestion of food and all those conditions that come with it.
Yeah.
But really what I want to start off with is asking you, well, what is the gut and what does it do?
So thank you firstly for having me, Ravina.
My
I appreciate your time and your effort in organising all of this.
Thank you.
So the gut is easily represented as a long tube. Okay. So the tube starts in your mouth and finishes at your bottom.
Okay.
It's very long, and from the outside we don't really realise how long it actually is. But you've probably got at least kind of 2-3 foot from your mouth down to the level of your stomach. We've got a little drawing here. I don't know how well this projects, but we might get a better one for afterwards when this airs. But essentially, you've got your mouth here, you've got your gullet that takes the food down.
So that's through the neck? Through
the neck and in through your chest and eventually into your stomach.
Yeah.
So when we say, stomach, to most people, we're talking about the whole thing.
Yes.
But in this situation, medically speaking, we're talking just about this little sac that actually sits just here under your rib cage.
So this is where the chewed food goes.
That's the first place it hits, yeah. And the stomach contains all the acid. It produces acid for you naturally, and that helps to kill all the germs and kill all the bad things in your food, clear it all out and make sure that it's basically clean and can be used and absorbed by your body. Otherwise, we'd be constantly trying to fight all of those extra germs and bugs that we eat in our food, and it would be difficult. Okay,
so that's the first place where our food's getting broken down.
Yeah. So also the stomach is a really powerful muscle, so it churns and it squeezes and it changes the food and it slowly starts to break it down. Okay.
Is that why people burp sometimes, because they get gases?
Yeah, so the gas and stuff. So lots of gas can get built up inside the stomach, and then we sometimes burp. That's completely normal. So from there, the food actually leaves the stomach and enters the first part of this complex, not complex, is a long tube system, which basically its main function is to absorb food and absorb the water that you've had in your diet. Okay. So
that sounds like a filtration system.
Yeah, so basically as the food is moving through, it will slowly start to get absorbed through the walls of the bowel. Okay. And there's really complex, highly functionalized little cells in the bowel that will pull the food into the bowel wall and into your blood supply. Okay. So there's two major parts of the bowel in this area anyway. There's the small bowel and there's the large bowel. Okay. You've probably got about 6 meters of small bowel inside your abdomen, which if you think about is actually quite a fair distance. Yeah. It's quite narrow. It's probably about that wide. Okay. But there's lots of it. 6 meters of it.
So it's all curled up in
It's all curled up, and that's what this little bit here represents anyway. And eventually that opens up into a larger system, which is the final portion of the bowel called the large bowel. Okay. So the small bowel empties into the large bowel, and the large bowel takes this big kind of U-shaped route all the way around. So it kind of goes all the way up your right side, across the middle and down your left side, and then eventually comes out round to your bottom. Yeah. The function of the large bowel is mainly to absorb the extra water content. So the small bowel takes all the nutrients and all the good stuff out of your food. You've still got some sloppy kind of, essentially the early stages of poo by the time it gets to here, into the large bowel, and then the large bowel starts to dry that out and get rid of all the extra moisture, because you don't want to waste all your moisture into your poo. Otherwise, you end up with you'd lose all your water and you'd become dehydrated. So that's basically the function of one of the functions of the bowel. There are multiple functions of the bowel, and it works in very, very complex ways.
So you're talking about the bowel. Is that the same as the intestine?
Yes. So we use, apologies. So the word bowel, intestines all means the same thing. Okay. So we can say large intestine, small intestine, and we can say large bowel, small bowel. It means the same thing. Okay. So we're all talking about this one continuous tube from the top down to your back passage.
Okay. I know one of the areas we're going to cover today is about conditions that people can have, like IBS, IBD, Crohn's disease. And before we talk about that, I really wanted to find out generically, sort of overall, what can go wrong with the intestines and the gut, and why do we have those kind of problems?
That's a massive, massive question.
Yeah, and I'm going to break it down. I know I am, yeah.
So there's a really big question because the amount of conditions, you know, there are textbooks written on just the conditions of the stomach, you know, massive surgical textbooks and medical textbooks.
It's a lot to cram in today.
Yeah, a lot to cram in, not for an hour's show anyway, but generally speaking, we could probably split up the conditions into two main areas, which are either medical problems with the bowel or surgical problems with the bowel. So surgical problems, I don't want to make it too simplified, but you know, mainly kind of if there's any blockages, if there's something where it shouldn't be, things try to poke out of little holes here and there. There's lots of different things that can cause mainly kind of plumbing and mechanical problems. And
yeah, this is definitely plumbing, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's unfortunately a surgeon's job, is to try and improve the plumbing and try and improve how this system works and how this system functions, and getting the food from here to there in the best way possible and what's best for the patient. Some of the medical problems are a bit more complex in that they're not as easily kind of identifiable, and they sometimes take longer to diagnose as well.
Is it easy then to sort of start the conversation before we go into the complications of talking about, well, how do we know we've got a healthy gut? You know, how does that work?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's unfortunately a really difficult question to answer because every single person's bowel is going to be completely different to anyone else's. Your bowel is yours, my bowel is mine, and our intestines work completely differently depending on who it is. You know, some people can occasionally go once every 5 days, once a week, and to the toilet, and that's normal for them.
Yeah. And we're talking about a poo.
Talking about a poo,
all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and some people go 3 or 4 times a day, and that's normal for them. And there's massive variation in the middle between those two ends of the spectrum. And the key principle is, if you notice anything that's different from your normal, then that's when you start to, you know, if it's a one-off, then fair enough, okay, just keep an eye on it.
Because sometimes you can have different foods and spices and that can change your bowel habits, can't it?
Completely. Some people go on like weird diets and stuff and that can change. But if you notice that something is steadily changing or continues to change and you still got a change and it hasn't really improved, then that's when you start to need to think about going to your doctor and going to someone to talk about this professionally, because there can be a world of different medical problems with the bowel, and we need to start to take some steps towards trying to find out what might be going on.
So a lot of that is that understanding of how your body works naturally for you.
Yes.
And then recognising when things aren't what you consider to be normal for you.
Exactly.
And then I think later on in the show we're going to talk about what are the symptoms that are serious enough for you to think about going to see the doctor, or that you really should go and see your doctor about. Okay. Let's go into the areas then of some of the topics that we sort of referenced earlier. One of the, I guess the first question is, why do people have eating disorders, and what goes wrong that people have different disorders? So,
I mean, today I think we wanted to focus specifically on the medical side rather than the surgical side, just because it's a whole kind of can of worms that we don't need to go into. So the medical side, there's lots of different medical problems that are mainly centred around the way that the bowel functions, sometimes the way that the actual anatomy of the bowel, and certain diseases affect the way that they don't cause a direct surgical problem that needs a surgical solution, but they can cause long-term problems, inflammatory problems like inflammation.
Does inflammation cause pain, or does it cause other symptoms?
Yeah, it can cause pain. So you know, inflammation anywhere in your body.
That's the swelling, isn't
swelling.
it? Yeah.
So it's the primary signs of inflammation are swelling, redness, pain, and kind of a lack of function, and redness, and those are the primary kind of symptoms of inflammation. If you go over on your ankle will be swollen, red hot, tender, and you won't be able to walk on it. So those are basically, and the same thing happens internally, but sometimes we can't always pick up on those signs straight away just because we can't see it.
Yeah. And I guess I should apologise because people might be having their tea at this time when they're watching this program, but we're talking about, you know, bowel habits, but at the same time, I guess the first sign somebody has that something isn't quite right is if they start to have diarrhea or constipation, as well as pain.
So I mean, abdominal pain is very, very common as a symptom. Lots of people have abdominal pain, and some people's abdominal pain we never get to the bottom of. We don't know why they've got it.
No pun intended.
No. But some people... Oh, you throw me off now.
I just couldn't resist that one.
So some people's pain we never get to the bottom of, which is unfortunate. But unfortunately, with the modern technologies that we have, we just never haven't been able to. A lot of symptoms we can try to get to the bottom of, at least do some investigations to get to the bottom of. And we sometimes, if not cure some people's pain or problems, we can at least try to manage it. And that's sometimes more realistic in terms of expectation from a patient's perspective and from a medical perspective, is that we may not be able to cure something, but we can at least make it tolerable and make you so that you can, you know, make it tolerable so much so that you can live a normal life or as close to normal life as possible.
Yeah, okay.
And quality of life is very, very important for us.
So I guess this is a good time to start talking about things like irritable bowel syndrome, which is one of the first topics we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
A lot of people know it as IBS.
Yes.
So what can you tell me why that's a problem? What is it?
Yeah, so firstly, let's just really quickly make sure we don't get confused. So there is two conditions with very similar names, but they're very, very different. There's IBS, which we're about to talk about now, and there's IBD.
Okay.
So IBS is irritable bowel syndrome, and IBD is inflammatory bowel disease.
Okay.
So
IBS,
two very
different
things.
Okay.
So irritable bowel syndrome is what we're first going to talk about, and that's a condition that is basically, we're not really sure what the exact cause is, but it's really, really common as a condition in our communities.
Yes, you hear about it a lot more today.
Yeah. For some reason, it's becoming more common. You know, international statistics say somewhere between 10 to 30% of the population can be diagnosed with IBS at some point in their life.
That's quite a lot, isn't it? Yeah.
Which, if you think about it, you know, if there's 10 people stood at a bus stop, 3 of them will have this condition.
Yeah. That's not a low number.
No, but that's what the medical literature says has been diagnosed. We are sure that there's probably more people out there who are living with the condition without even knowing they've got it, and haven't been formally been to a doctor with it, and hence haven't been diagnosed.
So what kind of symptoms might they have?
So IBS, the symptoms are vague and it's difficult. Everyone's symptoms are different and specific to them, and even those can change over the course of a few weeks or months. Roughly, you can split IBS patients into 3 groups.
Okay.
So a third of the patients will have mainly diarrhea symptoms more than 25% of the time.
Is that soon after eating?
Not necessarily. No. And then the other third will have mainly constipation, more than 25% of the time.
Okay.
And then another third will have mixed between constipation and diarrhea.
Okay.
Along with this, they get bloating, they get abdominal pain, they get excess wind, they feel tired, and they, you know, lots of problems there that unfortunately make sometimes people's mood go low, and they feel depressed as well with it.
So this plumbing then has got a lot that can go wrong with it.
Yes.
And it's so variable.
This is just one condition.
Yeah.
There are hundreds and hundreds of conditions, but we're just going to focus on these ones just because it's quite common.
Yes.
But yeah, this is a condition that we're not 100% sure as to why it happens, but there's lots of research to say that there's a connection with the way that the bowel is working. And what by that I mean, I've said to you that it's a long tube, and we've already shown the diagram, but one thing to understand is it's not just a tube that just sits there. It's a very, very active muscular tube. There's muscle lining the entire bowel going up from the top to the bottom.
Okay.
And this muscle is constantly, like a Mexican wave at a football match.
Yeah.
So the whole crowd goes up and then the wave travels across. That's exactly the same.
Okay.
The medical term for it is called peristalsis. That's just a word. All it means is that things are moving in this kind of cyclical waves that are going through.
There's that squeezing motion going on.
And actually the gut has its own nervous system, its own nerves, that is almost completely separate to the brain.
Okay.
It's got its in a way, it's got its own brain.
Okay.
And it runs completely separate to your brain. There is connections between the two, and things you do can increase the way that things are happening, which is why some people's mood affects the way that their belly works. But if you think about it just by itself, the gut is a self-functioning unit, and it can function by itself without any external involvement. So we don't even understand like this nervous system. It's so complex.
But it sounds to me like people that I know that have got IBS, that one of the things they're constantly assessing is what they eat.
Yeah, so diet is has a big impact, and lots of different things we can take in through our mouths and hitting our stomach will impact their condition. But ultimately, we think this is probably some link between the nervous system of the bowel and also the way that lots of external factors, even things like your diet is a big impact, but even things like stress. So there's multifactorial things going on. How quickly the bowel is moving, how stressed you are. And stress is a big part of this actually, because I just want to stop on there for a second, because stress is a really big part of this condition. If you are stressed, you are more likely to, not stress generally, I mean stress with this condition. If you've got stress and you've got IBS, unfortunately the two can be very closely linked and can be cyclical. So what I mean by that is, if you, for instance, have a fear of going into public places or a restaurant because you know that your diarrhea could come on really quickly, then you will try to avoid public places. Yeah. And that will make you stressed if you're in a public space. Yeah. And unfortunately the stress will bring on the IBS. So it's a horrible cycle, and to break out of it, it can take years sometimes.
So we need to know how to manage this then,
yeah.
don't we? So what's the advice given to people with IBS?
So IBS, we can split it up into different bits. So firstly, stress management. So you need to make sure that you try to limit any stresses. Easy said than done. I know you were going to say that review. Yeah. Easier said than done. And as a doctor, I spend most of my life really stressed out anyway. Yeah. But
I think nowadays we're in that kind of life.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just the way that the life works nowadays.
We're all juggling so many
We've
things.
got certain ways that we can do that, and professionally, if you go to your doctor and you find stress is a problem, we've got different ways that we can help with stress. Okay, we don't need to go into those today, but there are many ways that we can help with stress.
I think that's a program in itself, isn't it?
Stress is a separate program altogether. So stress is one thing, diet is another thing. So with...
Somebody rang in actually and asked me if wheat products had an impact on IBS.
So it's really complicated. Because there's different types of IBS, and some people have diarrhea mainly, some people have constipation, some people have mixed. The diet plan that you needs to be tailored to you and your specific type of problem, which is why there are specific IBS dietitians in the NHS who are specialised in IBS, and they are the people to go to. And if you've got a problem and you go to your GP can make a referral to a dietitian and even to a specific IBS dietitian as well, who can help you kind of hone down on exactly which foods are causing problems for you. You know, there are, broadly speaking, lots of water is good. You need lots of water. That's the same for most things anyway. Yeah. In terms of fibre, like your wheat thing that you're talking about, it's slightly more complicated. Fibre is, we say fibre, and we think it's one thing, but actually there's different types of fibre.
Oh, the skin on fruit, like apples and pears, is
exactly,
fibre,
yeah. So there's soluble fibre and insoluble fibre. Insoluble fibre is stuff like the wheat and the whole grains and stuff.
So insoluble means it's not dissolving in water?
So it doesn't dissolve in the water. And the soluble one is the one that actually ends up partially dissolving in water as well.
Breaks down quicker.
Yeah, so what we mean by that is if someone has got symptoms where they've got a lot of constipation and they're not really moving along very well, then the soluble forms such as oats and certain bran products, they can actually help by pulling in a lot of water and helping the stuff move along. And the alternative is true for someone who's got constipation. But again, it's really specific to that one person and what the dietitian thinks is best for them. The best thing to do is keep a food diary and see how you are actually, how often you're going, to the toilet and what foods you've eaten and try to coordinate some kind of pattern.
So you're learning about what things trigger you, what things aggravate your health, and having to learn about. I guess this comes back to that ownership that we're encouraging all our owners to take on board, and that by learning about how your body works, you can actually learn about how to look after it better.
Completely. And
Okay.
unfortunately, because everyone is so different and individualistic, it makes it very difficult for me to give like one formula, for
Absolutely.
everybody. It's really specific, and a good consultation could last 40, 50 an hour by itself.
Yeah,
Just
and I know
to
today
hone
is just
down
about touching on the
Yeah.
surface of the subject, and I'm conscious of the fact that we're going to not have too long before we have to go towards
Of course,
the break, so I
yeah,
want
we
to
do.
move on to the others, if that's okay. So it is very much about having that conversation and monitoring what
So if
works
you've got
well for you.
abdominal pain, you've got a change in your bowel habit, sometimes IBS is triggered by an event such as even an episode of like a tummy bug, like gastroenteritis.
Right.
So if you end up with vomiting and diarrhea, that can be the start.
Okay.
Most people with IBS get it before they're about 50% of it get them before they're 35 years old.
Okay.
So it's it is possible to get it when you're older, but more commonly when you get it
Sure.
younger.
Okay.
It can go away, but it can come back, and people can go through little
Okay.
phases in their lives with it.
So how does it vary with irritable bowel disease then?
So inflammatory bowel disease.
Inflammatory.
Yeah.
Okay.
So irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel
Okay.
disease. So irritable bowel syndrome, there's no cure for it, but we can, with a lot of little things and a lot of little tweaks in our diet and these plans, we can try to manage it better. And we don't really need much hospital input from that. Inflammatory bowel disease is very different.
So this is the IBD.
IBD.
Yeah.
So this is this is an umbrella term for a range of conditions. The best way to think of it is actually on a spectrum. So it's not kind of black and white. There's two main conditions, but there's things in the middle where it's a bit murky.
Okay.
One end you've got something called Crohn's disease.
Okay, yes, I've heard of that.
You've heard of Crohn's. And the other end of the spectrum you've got ulcerative colitis.
Okay, so these come under the umbrella of IBD.
Yeah, so
okay, I
IBD
didn't
is an umbrella
realise that.
term, and it encompasses these. But as I said, there are grey regions in the middle where one person can have, and sometimes we have indeterminate disease, which means that we can't clarify whether it's one or the other, and you're somewhere in the middle, because the disease acts like this for a bit of the time, and it acts like that for a bit of the time. We can't really put our finger on it. The management for those is different depending on which one it is and how long you've had it. And
So what symptoms would you have? Because I'm trying to think, okay, it's okay, we know the names, but actually how could you think you might have it?
So before we do that, just to catch on what it actually is. So it's basically a long-term inflammatory disease of the bowel.
Okay.
IBD, Crohn's disease can affect, the easier way to try and distinguish the two is that Crohn's disease can affect anywhere from your mouth all the way down to your bottom.
Okay.
So the whole of that tract, the whole tube can be affected.
So that comes under Crohn's disease?
In some places, yeah.
Right.
So you can have little mouth ulcers, you can have problems in your gullet, you can have problems in your stomach and in your small and your large bowel.
Okay.
And it's really difficult because it's all over the place.
Yeah.
It's difficult to manage. People have it, doesn't mean you get it all over. So people might just get it in one place.
Yeah.
Most people do. A lot of people have it just where the small bowel meets the large bowel, so just in that region here, they can get it there. Ulcerative colitis, on the other hand, tends to mainly affect the large bowel, so it starts down here and kind of starts and just affects the large bowel, which is the last kind of 4 or 5 feet of the bowel from your bottom side, from the other end.
As a patient, though, you wouldn't know that.
No, there's no way from a patient point of view. The symptoms and the signs probably would be about the same, so abdominal pain, change in bowel habit, something that's quite common and actually possible to get in IBS as well, which is where starts to get a bit more serious, is that people can get mucus in their stools, which is like slimy, sticky stools.
Right, okay.
So if you ever go for a poo, what I would say is, it sounds horrible, but you need to have a look and see what's in there, because no one else in the world is going to know what's in your poo apart from you. Unless you're rich enough to have someone else flush the toilet for you, but unfortunately I'm not. So right now you need to make sure that you are the one to have to take responsibility for that. So have a look and see if there's any slime, if there's any sticky things, or if there's anything floating, if there's any blood. Those are worrying signs. Not necessarily means that there's something really wrong. Blood in the stool is very common. Lots of people have it. and it can be due to something really very tame, like having piles, which are little things from the back passage that cause bleeding.
We're actually coming up to the break, Raj,
Sure,
and I'm
sure.
just thinking we've literally got about 15 to 20 seconds to sort of before we go to break. So hopefully we're going to come back and
we'll
continue with this.
Yeah.
And I guess what would be important to look at is how we're going to manage this and what we need to do about it.
We'll distinguish them and then we'll manage it.
Yeah, okay. Okay, everybody, it's coming up to the break time. Inshallah, we're going to see you soon and we're going to continue the conversation. Apologies for those of you that are having something to eat at this time. I know it's not the best topic to think about, but we're hoping that it's going to be useful to you. Inshallah, I'll see you soon. Assalamu alaikum.